Close your eyes and step backward, not by years or centuries, but by hundreds of millions of years, until the world is almost unrecognizable. You stand not on the familiar map of scattered continents, not on a planet of the Atlantic and Pacific, of Asia apart from Africa and Australia floating free. Instead, you stand upon a single, immense landmass, a giant cradle of stone and soil, mountain and desert, stretching so far in every direction that the horizon itself bends beneath its weight. This is Pangaea, the world as one. It is a time when Earth still hums with the echoes of catastrophe. Only a few million years earlier, life had suffered its greatest test, the Permian extinction, a calamity so devastating that the seas nearly emptied and the forests nearly withered away. More than 90% of species vanished, and the silence that followed was heavy and long. But Earth is resilient, and so is life. Slowly, steadily, tenderly, green returned to the land. Fins once again sliced through waters, and creatures began to breathe and move beneath the wide open sky. And the land itself, the land was a titan. Imagine all the continents you know today, North and South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Antarctica, Australia, not as scattered puzzle pieces drifting across the oceans, but as a single whole. No Atlantic rift, no Indian basin, no familiar separation. All joined together, pressed tight by the great, slow grinding of Earth's crust. To walk across, it would be to cross a canvas larger than imagination. Deserts flowing like seas of sand, mountain chains sharp and jagged, endless plains rolling toward the horizon. The heart of Pangaea was unforgiving. With no nearby oceans to soften the air, the climate grew harsh and extreme. Summers scorched the soil into cracked mosaics, the sun blazing mercilessly overhead. Winds carried dust for hundreds of miles, leaving the land dry and restless. And yet, in this emptiness, there was a strange kind of beauty. Picture towering dunes, rising higher than modern cities, their crests gleaming gold in the light of dawn. Picture the silence of standing there, with nothing but the hiss of shifting sand and the faint scurry of some reptile quick enough to hide in the shade. But not all of Pangaea was so barren. Along the edges of rivers, life clung and blossomed. Water carved veins of green through the stone, and forests of conifers rose tall and proud, their trunks thick as pillars, their needles whispering in winds that smelled faintly of resin and rain. Beneath them, ferns unfurled delicate fronds, softening the forest floor, while insects buzzed and clicked in the shafts of sunlight. Amphibians rested in shaded pools, their skins slick and shining, their unblinking eyes reflecting a world of shadows. And reptiles, small and sturdy, warmed themselves on rocks, lifting their heads to the breeze as if testing the day. And beyond it all lay the sea Panthalassa, the world ocean. It circled Pangaea in an unbroken sweep of water, a vast blue mirror reflecting the moods of the sky. Its tides pulled and released, its currents spun patterns that shaped the weather across the land. Along the coasts, waves whispered against sand and thundered against cliffs. On stormy nights, lightning carved jagged light across black waves, and the roar of thunder rolled for miles, shaking both sea and land. Above it stretched the heavens, unpolluted and vast. At sunrise, the sky glowed in hues of copper and rose, painting the forests in soft light. At midday, it blazed a sharp, endless blue. At dusk, the air softened into amber and violet, until finally the stars spilled across the night, countless, dazzling, closer than they seem today. The Milky Way shimmered like a river of frost, meteors traced silver arcs, and the moon hung heavy, casting her pale light on plains, forests, and seas alike. To stand in Pangaea was to feel the scale of Earth, her unity and her might. There was a wholeness here, a singularity that no age has since repeated. It was a time before continents drifted apart, before oceans cut borders between lands, before the world became divided. And though Pangaea was destined to fracture, to tear open rifts, to drift apart into the shapes we know, its memory lingers. We see it in fossils that match across oceans, in mountain chains that continue across continents, in the shared echoes of a time when Earth herself was one body. Pangaea was not just a place, but a presence, immense, raw, and alive. It was unity before separation, a fleeting moment when the world gathered herself whole. To tell her story is to remember that even the greatest forms of togetherness are temporary, yet within their briefness lies their beauty. For in her vastness and silence, in her deserts and forests, in her oceans and seas, Pangaea whispered one truth to every creature that lived upon her: the earth is one, and in her embrace, so are we. To imagine Pangaea is to imagine something beyond the scale of ordinary thought. Our modern maps divide the earth into scattered shapes, continents separated by seas and oceans, drifting slowly but surely away from one another. Yet in this time, in this age of the Mesozoic, all of them were bound together into one titanic body. It was not simply a continent. It was the continent, the colossus of continents. From above, had there been eyes to see, Pangaea might have looked like a rough giant's hand stretched across the face of the globe, its fingers of land reaching toward the edges of the world ocean. From the frozen reaches near the poles to the humid equatorial belts, Pangaea sprawled, massive and unbroken. No human eye has ever beheld such a land, and no human foot has ever trodden it. Yet still, through the bones of earth, through the stones that remain, we can picture its immensity. To stand upon it would be humbling. The horizon stretched in every direction, unbroken by seas. You could walk for weeks, months, years, and still find yourself surrounded by land. Plains rolled outward in every direction, their grasses sparse in some regions, dense and green in others. Deserts spread like seas of sand, dune after dune gleaming gold beneath the punishing sun. Forests towered along rivers, their needles whispering together like ancient choirs, filling the air with scents of resin and cool shade. Mountains cut the skyline with jagged teeth, young and sharp, still raw from the collisions that had forced continents into union. Scale of Pangaea made the air itself different. Winds swept unhindered across thousands of miles, carrying dust from deserts, moisture from coasts, cool breath from high plateaus. Storms could rage across regions larger than entire countries, their thunder rolling unbroken for hours. Rain might bless a coastline with abundance, yet never reach the parched interior, leaving the heartland to thirst beneath a sun that offered no mercy. In such a land, weather itself was a sovereign force, shaping the rhythms of survival. In the coasts and valleys, life thrived. Reptiles scuttled across warm stones, their scales shimmering like bronze under the sun. Amphibians lingered by rivers, their slick bodies resting half in water, half in shadow. Insects with translucent wings hummed above ferns, their delicate bodies catching the light like shards of glass. Forests of conifers swayed in the wind, their branches weaving together into thick canopies where countless small creatures lived and hunted. But in the vast interior, life struggled. Far from the soothing presence of oceans, the land grew harsh. Imagine walking there, the soil cracked and dry, the dunes rising like golden mountains. Heat shimmered on the horizon, distorting vision, turning the air itself into a mirage. Here, survival was a battle against thirst and hunger. Small reptiles darted from shadow to shadow, their lives measured in careful sprints. Hardy plants thrust roots deep into stubborn soil, drawing out drops of water where none seemed to exist. At night, the air grew suddenly cold, and creatures curled into burrows or crevices, clinging to what warmth they had stored during the day. Even the mountains bore witness to Pangaea's strength. They rose where collisions had pressed rock upon rock, their peaks etched sharp against the sky. Snow clung to their summits, even as deserts simmered below, a contrast of extremes born from the scale of one continent. Rivers tumbled down their slopes, carving valleys of green that stretched like threads of life across the stone. In these places, the world felt almost gentle. Mist curled in the morning, birds with primitive wings glided through the air, and the sound of flowing water softened the silence. To live in Pangaea was to live in a world of contrasts, abundance on the fringes, severity at the core, gentle forests in one region, searing deserts in another. Yet all of it was joined, all of it was part of one body. The unity of Pangaea gave rise to both its gifts and its hardships. And in that unity lay a lesson that scale itself can shape the very nature of existence. The colossus of continents was not meant to last forever. Already, the Earth's restlessness whispered beneath its surface. Deep below, the mantle shifted, pressure built, and the first hints of future rifts stirred. But in this moment, in this chapter of time, the Earth stood whole. One land, one body, one vast colossus beneath the sky. And upon its immensity, life had found a stage so large that it would take millions of years to fill. The breath of Pangaea was the wind. Over a continent so vast, so seamless, the patterns of air that moved across its surface were unlike any we know today. There were no familiar oceans breaking the land into manageable pieces, no scattered continents with seas between to shape gentle cycles of rain and breeze. Instead, air flowed across a giant's canvas, traveling thousands of miles before meeting a change in landscape. In this world, the wind was not merely weather, it was a force of life and death, a sculptor of climate, a voice that whispered through deserts, mountains, and forests alike. Imagine standing at the edge of one of Pangaea's great deserts. The horizon glows with heat, and the dunes rise like frozen waves of gold. From the west, a hot wind gathers speed, crossing unbroken plains, carrying dust in thick veils that sting the eyes and coat the tongue. It moans low across the sand, a constant presence, reshaping dunes grain by grain, sweeping across the land as if intent on scouring it bare. Day after day, this dry breath steals what little moisture exists, leaving plants twisted and gnarled, their roots probing desperately into deep earth. For creatures that lived here, survival was written in adaptation. Reptiles with scales toughened against the sun, insects that burrowed into cool soil, seeds that waited in silence for the rare gift of rain. But travel further, toward the coasts, and the winds soften. Here they are tempered by the ocean, cooled and enriched with moisture. They arrive carrying the scent of salt and spray, a reminder of Panthalassa's endless embrace. These breezes slip through conifer forests, stirring the green shadows with whispers and sighs. They rustle through fern fronds and make the needles of towering trees sway gently like green waves. They carry the hum of insects, the calls of distant reptiles, and the earthy scent of damp soil. A forest under the breath of the sea was a place of comfort, a living sanctuary, sheltered from the extremes that burned in the continent's heart. Above the rivers, the winds curled and danced, playful and changeable. They chased across silver currents, rippling the surface in patterns of light and shadow. They carried seeds aloft, tiny messengers that drifted on unseen highways, scattering new growth to floodplains and valleys. They whirled around cliffs and tumbled into canyons, their voices echoing off stone until it seemed the very rocks were alive with song. Birds had not yet fully claimed the skies, but small feathered creatures, the ancestors of what would one day take wing, felt the air beneath their arms and tails, testing the invisible currents that flowed above the land. And then there were the storms. Across Pangaea, storms could grow to monstrous scales, their clouds gathering over thousands of miles, darkening the sky from horizon to horizon. Thunder boomed like the cracking of the world's bones, and lightning painted the heavens in silver-white streaks. Rain fell in sheets, sometimes so heavy it turned rivers into raging torrents, flooding valleys and washing across plains. Other times, the storms passed swiftly, their rains swallowed by thirsty soils, leaving behind only the scent of petrichor and the hush of dripping needles. To stand within one of these tempests was to feel the power of the earth herself, reminding every creature, from the smallest insect to the tallest tree, that life was fragile beneath the moods of the sky. At night, the winds calmed, and they became something gentler. They whispered across the deserts, cool now under the silver glow of the moon. They carried scents of resin from forests, of salt from the distant ocean, of damp earth from hidden rivers. They stirred the grasses softly, like lullabies across the sleeping land. To rest on such a night, with the stars spilled across the heavens and the breath of the world moving steadily against your skin, was to feel the earth alive and vast, a home both immense and intimate. Winds across the unified world were more than weather. They were lifelines, carrying water, seed, and breath. They were storytellers, whispering across mountains, hissing through canyons, roaring across dunes. They shaped not only the land, but the creatures that walked upon it. They taught resilience to those who lived in the deserts, offered abundance to those by the coasts, and carried whispers of the future in their restless wanderings. For even then, in the breath of Pangaea, there was a subtle hint of change. Beneath the land, deep in the mantle, the earth was stirring, preparing for a time when winds would blow not across one world, but across many. But in this moment, in this chapter of Earth's story, the winds belonged to one land, one continent, one body. They were the voice of Pangaea, sighing, howling, whispering, and singing across the colossus of stone. And in their voice was a truth that every creature heard. The earth was one, and her breath touched all. At the center of Pangaea lay a realm of silence and heat. Far from the softening influence of oceans, beyond the reach of regular rains, the interior of the supercontinent was transformed into one of the greatest deserts the world has ever known. This was no ordinary expanse of sand and stone, but a continent-sized wilderness, a heart of dryness beating at the center of the earth. Imagine standing there. Before you, dunes rise like frozen waves, mountains of sand sculpted by relentless winds. Their crests gleam white and gold beneath the sun, their slopes shifting grain by grain, hour by hour, as though alive. In the heat of midday, the air itself seems to ripple and dance. The horizon blurs, mirages shimmer like pools of water that vanish as you draw near, and the silence presses heavy on your ears, broken only by the hiss of the wind or the faint rustle of sand sliding down a dune's face. Daylight in this desert was merciless. The sun bore down without pity, its rays untempered by clouds. The ground cracked into mosaics of baked clay, each fissure like the lines of an ancient script written by the earth itself. Plants were scarce, reduced to stubborn shrubs clinging to whatever scraps of moisture they could find. Their roots twisted deep underground, probing fissures in search of hidden water. When they bloomed, rarely, briefly, their flowers burned with sudden brilliance, tiny bursts of color against the sea of beige and red. A fleeting reminder that life, even here, persisted. Creatures adapted to this furnace in remarkable ways. Small reptiles, the pioneers of arid living, scuttled across the hot stones. Their bodies pressed low to the ground to avoid the worst of the sun, their scales gleaming like copper under the harsh light. Some burrowed deep during the day, emerging only in the cooler hush of twilight to hunt insects that had rested in the shadows. Others carried water within themselves, surviving for days on nothing but the stores within their bodies. Their very existence was a triumph of patience and endurance. Insects thrived here too, masters of quiet adaptation. Beetles dug into the sand, waiting out the scorching hours. Winged forms skimmed near what little vegetation existed, their delicate bodies fragile yet unbroken. On rare nights after rain, swarms erupted briefly, filling the air with a hum like distant music, only to vanish again with the returning dryness. Their cycles were short, their lives ephemeral, yet they were threads in the fabric of survival. Night in the desert heart was another world entirely. As the sun sank, the searing heat bled away into the sky, and the land grew cool, even cold. Stars spilled across the heavens in dizzying brilliance, unchallenged by clouds or haze. The Milky Way cut a silver band across the darkness, and meteors flared like sparks from unseen fires. The dunes glowed faintly in moonlight, their curves softened, their edges gentle. In this nocturnal world, creatures emerged from their hiding places, reptiles slipping silently across the sand, amphibians creeping from hidden burrows, insects rising in glittering flurries. Life in the desert lived by rhythm, a slow dance of endurance, patience, and timing. There were oases too, rare jewels in the wilderness. Springs bubbled up from fractures in stone, forming pools that gleamed under the stars. Around them grew clusters of vegetation, ferns, reeds, and conifers, creating sudden bursts of green in the ocean of sand. These places became sanctuaries, gathering points where life flourished. Amphibians croaked in chorus from the water's edge, insects swarmed in clouds, reptiles basked on warm rocks. Even larger creatures passed through, drawn by the precious gift of water. These oases were reminders that even in the harshest places, Earth gives small kindnesses, small mercies. The desert heart of Pangaea was harsh, but it was never lifeless. It was a crucible of survival, shaping creatures that learned resilience, patience, and endurance. It was a place of beauty too, though its beauty was not gentle. It was in the sweep of endless dunes, the sharp shadows at dusk, the brilliance of stars unbroken by haze. It was in the whisper of wind across the sands, carrying stories of ages long past. To journey into Pangaea's desert heart was to confront the extremes of the earth, to feel both her cruelty and her quiet generosity. It was a place of solitude, a place that humbled, a place that tested life's resolve. And yet, like every other corner of this immense continent, it was alive with whispers of the future, alive with the determination of creatures who would one day give rise to empires of life. The desert was the heart of Pangaea, beating slowly, silently, beneath the endless sky. Not all of Pangaea was desert. Along the fringes where rivers carved their silver paths, where mountains caught the rain, and where the breath of the ocean softened the air, forests took root. These were not the lush jungles we might imagine today, but ancient woodlands of conifers, cycads, and ferns. They stood as green sanctuaries in a world otherwise ruled by aridity, breathing moisture and life into the supercontinent's vast body. Here, in their cool shadows, the land whispered a gentler story. Step into one of these forests, and the first thing you notice is the change in the air. Outside, the sun blazes harshly, beating down on open rock and sand. Inside, the canopy shields you in dappled light. Tall conifers rise like pillars, their trunks straight and strong, their crowns spreading needles that catch the breeze. The wind does not howl here as it does across the dunes. It sighs, soft and patient, threading through branches and filling the air with a hushed, resinous perfume. The ground beneath your feet is soft with fallen needles, each step muffled into silence. Between the towering trees grow cycads, squat, palm-like plants with fronds curling outward like giant green fans. Their textures are rough, their forms ancient, as if sculpted by time itself. Ferns spread across the forest floor in endless waves of fronds, delicate yet determined, unfurling in spirals of fresh growth. Moss clings to stones and fallen trunks, drinking the dampness of shaded air. It is a world painted in every shade of green, dark and light, deep and bright, layered one upon another until even the shadows feel alive. Life stirs in these shadows. Insects drone softly, their wings shimmering in beams of sunlight that pierce the canopy. Beetles crawl along the bark, their shells gleaming black or bronze. Dragonflies skim over shallow pools, their wings flickering like glass in the dim light. Tiny reptiles rest on warm stones, basking where the sun sneaks through, their heads lifting to test the air for prey. Amphibians crouch in the undergrowth, their throats pulsing as they call into the stillness, waiting for an unsung croak from deeper within the wood. Rivers thread through these forests, narrow streams and wide, meandering channels alike. Their waters murmur constantly, a voice of comfort that fills the silence. Along their banks, conifers lean, their roots twisting into damp soil, gripping stones polished smooth by centuries of flow. Pools form where the current slows, reflecting the canopy above, mirrors of green and gold rippling with every passing breeze. The air here is cool, fresh, tinged with the earthy fragrance of damp leaves. It is a place where creatures come to drink, to bathe, to rest in safety. Even the light here has its own language. At dawn, the forest glows with pale gold, each needle tuppered with dew that glitters like scattered stars. By midday, the canopy filters the sun into gentle shafts, beams that drift and wander as the branches sway, illuminating patches of earth like lanterns. At dusk, the forest darkens early, shadows deepening until only a dim green twilight remains, peaceful and calm, the world preparing for sleep. And when night falls fully, the stars are hidden, but the air remains alive with sound, the hum of insects, the calls of amphibians, the rustle of unseen movement. To linger here is to feel the balance of earth. Outside the forests, deserts sprawl and mountains rise harsh and bare, but within these green shadows, the world is softened, patient, almost tender. They are sanctuaries, shelters where life can flourish, places where the ancient rhythm of growth and decay plays out quietly, season after season, year after year. The forests of Pangaea were more than refuges. They were the lungs of the supercontinent, drawing in breath and releasing it again, balancing the air, shaping the climate in ways unseen but essential. They were also timekeepers, their growth rings recording droughts and floods, warmth and cold, the secret history of an earth that was restless even in its wholeness. In these places, you could forget the immensity of the continent. You could walk beneath the green shadows and feel the world shrink to a smaller, more intimate scale. The size of a tree trunk beneath your hand, the sound of water slipping over stones, the glint of a beetle's shell in sunlight. For a moment, Pangaea became not a colossus, not a titan, but a quiet, breathing home. And so, as deserts roared with silence and mountains strained skyward, the forests of green shadows endured, holding pockets of peace in the heart of a restless world. Pangaea, for all its harsh deserts and sprawling forests, was also a land of rivers. They were the veins of the continent, stitching green and silver threads through a body of stone and sand. Without them, the heart of Pangaea might have been a lifeless expanse, but with them came renewal, winding corridors of abundance where life could gather, rest, and thrive. Imagine one such river, born high in the mountains. At its source, the water bursts forth from melting snow and hidden springs, tumbling down steep cliffs in foaming cascades. It roars at first, wild and untamed, carving gorges as it rushes downward, its spray kissing the air with cool mist. In the morning light, the droplets shimmer like jewels, scattering rainbows against the dark walls of stone. The sound of it fills the valley, constant, steady, a heartbeat echoing through rock. As the river leaves the mountains, its pace slows, spreading into wide, glimmering channels across the plains. Here, it winds lazily, carving oxbows and meanders, sometimes branching into braided streams that weave like silver threads across the earth. Its banks are soft with fertile soil, nourished by floods that come and go with the seasons. Ferns crowd close to the edges, their fronds dipping into the water as though drinking. Conifers lean above, their roots gripping the damp ground, while cycads unfurl their fronds in sunlight. Everywhere the water touches, green thrives. Life gathers here in abundance. Amphibians sprawl along the banks, their slick bodies shining in the sun, throats pulsing with low calls. Reptiles bask on warm stones, slipping into the shallows to cool their scales. Insects skim the surface, their delicate legs dimpling the water as they dance from ripple to ripple. Dragonflies dart overhead, wings glinting like shards of glass. Beneath the surface, fish flicker in quick, darting movements, vanishing in flashes of silver when shadows pass above. Birds had not yet fully claimed the skies, but small feathered reptiles tested the air here, gliding from branch to branch, their movements clumsy yet full of promise. Their shadows flickered across the water, sending ripples of alarm through the creatures below. The river was more than water, it was a stage, a theater of endless interactions, where predator and prey, plant and seed, life and death played out day after day. At dusk, the river shimmered under fading light. The sun slipped low, turning its surface into a ribbon of molten gold. Frogs croaked in chorus, their calls echoing like an ancient song. The air cooled, and mist rose gently from the surface, curling like smoke into the twilight. Fireflies, or their ancestral kin, flickered among reeds, tiny lanterns drifting above the water. The world seemed softer here, gentler, as though the river itself offered comfort against the immensity of the continent. But rivers were not always calm. In seasons of heavy rain, storms swollen by winds sweeping across Pangaea poured water into their channels. They swelled with power, rising over their banks, flooding forests and plains alike. Their waters churned brown with silt, dragging logs and stones in their grasp, reshaping the land in their fury. When they finally subsided, they left behind rich layers of soil, nourishing the next cycle of growth. Destruction and renewal, fury and gentleness, the rivers held both, carrying within them the rhythm of Earth's patience. Stone bore witness to their passage. Along canyon walls, the rivers carved stories, lines etched deep in the rock, a language of time written in layers of sediment. Each curve of stone, each sweep of cliff, each hollowed cave was a mark of their persistence. To walk through such a canyon was to walk through memory, to feel the echo of centuries whispered by the drip of water. The rivers of Pangaea were threads of connection. They linked deserts to coasts, forests to plains, mountains to valleys. They fed life where otherwise there might have been none. They offered movement, carrying seeds downstream, carrying silt to the sea, carrying stories written in stone. To sit by such a river, under the shade of tall conifers, the air cool and damp, the sound of water steady and eternal, was to feel cradled by the earth. The river was not only a passage of water, it was a companion, a song, a presence. It gave life to Pangaea, and in its flowing voice it promised that even in a land so vast and restless, there would always be places of gentleness, of green, of renewal. If the deserts were Pangaea's heart and the rivers her veins, then her edges were her breathing skin, where land stretched out and finally yielded to the embrace of Panthalassa, the one great ocean that circled the world. These coasts were vast beyond imagining, for Pangaea's shoreline was not the border of one continent, but the border of all. It was a line of stone and sand that measured in tens of thousands of miles, wrapping like a ribbon around the colossus of land. To walk these shores was to encounter a world that shifted endlessly between land and sea, between the solidity of earth and the eternal rhythm of waves. Imagine standing upon one such shore. Before you, the ocean stretches away in an unbroken sweep of blue, so immense that it seems to swallow the horizon. Panthalassa is not like any modern sea, It is larger, deeper, circling Earth in a single colossal band. The sound of it is endless. Waves rising and falling, waves shattering against cliffs, waves hissing across long beaches. The air tastes of salt, sharp and cool, a flavour carried on breezes that never cease. Seabirds, ancient ancestors, wheel overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. The coasts of Pangaea were varied and magnificent. In some places, beaches stretched wide and flat, pale sands glistening in the sun. Here, waves crept gently in silver arcs, leaving behind ripples of foam and delicate shells. Tiny creatures scuttled in the wet sand, insects, crustaceans, early arthropods that hid quickly as the tide rolled in. In other places, cliffs rose sheer and dark, hammered by waves that exploded into white spray. The sound of water striking stone was like the beating of drums, a rhythm that carried far inland, echoing in the ears of reptiles that rested in the sun. Tide pools filled the cracks and hollows of these rocky coasts, small universes of life. In them, anemone-like creatures opened soft tentacles to the waves, fish with primitive jaws darted in quick flashes of silver, and strange, shelled beings crept slowly along the stones. Each pool was a microcosm, an echo of the ocean contained in miniature, fragile yet vibrant. Children of the sea, testing the edges of land, shared these spaces with insects blown in by the wind, creating a mingling of worlds in shallow water. The air along the coasts was alive with movement. Winds from the ocean swept across the beaches, cool and briny, carrying moisture that fed forests not far inland. Clouds gathered often here, swelling with rain that fell heavy and sweet, soaking the soil. Forests of conifers and cycads leaned close to the shore, their roots gripping rocky soil, their branches whispering in the sea breeze. These coastal woods were havens of abundance, filled with the hum of insects and the calls of creatures that lingered where water and land embraced. And in the shallows, new rulers were emerging, marine reptiles, their bodies sleek and strong, adapted for a life in water. Some swam like serpents, their bodies twisting gracefully beneath the waves. Others propelled themselves with paddle-like limbs, cutting swiftly through the surf. They surfaced with quick breaths, their eyes scanning the horizon, their sleek forms glistening in the sun before vanishing again into the deep. They were the ocean's experiment, early architects of the reptilian dynasty that would dominate both land and sea in the ages to come. At sunset, the coasts of Pangaea glowed with a beauty that words can scarcely capture. The horizon turned molten with gold and crimson, the waves reflecting fire as though the ocean itself had caught a light. Shadows of reptiles moved across the sands, their footprints pressed into the wet earth to be washed away by the next tide. In the tide pools, the water caught the colors of the sky, tiny worlds painted with crimson and violet. The wind softened, the ocean's roar became a steady hush, and night descended gently, bringing with it the rhythm of the waves under silver moonlight. To sleep upon such a shore was to rest with the heartbeat of the earth. The sea moved in and out, a breath as old as time, steady and eternal. Stars burned above, their light mirrored faintly in the black water. The cries of ancient seabirds echoed across the dark, lonely and haunting, carried for miles on the ocean wind. And always, beneath the surface, the sea stirred with unseen lives, countless and mysterious, the hidden engine of Earth's renewal. The shores of Pangaea were not merely edges, they were thresholds. Here the land met the sea, and in that meeting, life blossomed, mingled, and transformed. Creatures of the ocean tested the land, creatures of the land pressed into the shallows. Seeds floated on waves to distant beaches, new beginnings carried upon the tides. It was at these endless borders that the future was born, where the world learned again and again how to weave together water and soil, air and stone. And so, though deserts claimed the interior and forests filled the river valleys, it was along these coasts that the supercontinent breathed most deeply. Shores without end, circling a land without equal, sang with the eternal rhythm of waves, a song that still lingers in every ocean, every beach, every stone polished smooth by the sea. Across the face of Pangaea, where continents had collided and fused, mountains rose like the bones of the earth laid bare. They stretched for hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, vast chains of stone that formed the backbone of the supercontinent. These were mountains newly born in geological time, sharp and jagged, their peaks thrust skyward in restless defiance. To walk among them, was to walk upon the spines of giants, the colossal ridges where the earth herself had folded and groaned to create one world. Imagine the view from afar, ranges upon ranges, blue and violet in the haze of distance, each line of peaks rising higher than the last, their forms cutting the horizon into a jagged saw. Valleys carved deep between them, some filled with forests, others barren and raw, their rock exposed like scars. The mountains caught the clouds, pulling them from the wandering winds, wrapping their shoulders in mist. In their high reaches, snow glittered even in times of warmth, crowning them with white while deserts simmered far below. To climb these slopes was to feel the earth change with every step. At the foothills, forests clung to the soil, their conifers tall and dense, their shadows filled with the hum of insects and the scurry of reptiles. Streams tumbled over rocks, their waters cold and clear, feeding into rivers that would one day carve valleys of life far below. As you ascended, the air grew thin and cool, the trees fell away, and bare stone rose in their place. The wind sharpened, sweeping over ridges with a mournful whistle, carrying with it the scent of ice and the echo of distance. Higher still, the silence deepened. Snow crunched beneath your feet, the cold biting into your skin, the world below vanishing beneath blankets of cloud. From these summits, Pangaea stretched in every direction, a patchwork of colors and textures, deserts glowing golden in the sun, rivers flashing silver, forests dark and endless, and beyond them all, the pale band of Panthalassa shimmering on the horizon. To stand upon such a peak was to see the whole of Earth united, to feel the immensity of a planet gathered into one body. But the mountains were more than a spectacle. They were sculptors of the land. Glaciers carved their flanks in colder reaches, grinding rock into valleys that would cradle life when the ice retreated. Avalanches thundered down their slopes, reshaping the earth in sudden violence. Rivers born of melting snow carried stones and silt into the lowlands, laying down the fertile soil that would feed forests and plains. Every ridge, every gorge, every sheer cliff face was the mark of time's chisel, the evidence of a world still building, still reshaping itself in restless creativity. Life here was scarce, yet not absent. Hardy conifers rooted themselves in cracks of stone, clinging where soil was no more than a handful of dust. Moss crept across wet rock near streams, glowing green in shadowed crevices. Insects buzzed low to the ground, taking refuge in the warmth of the sunlit slopes. Small reptiles basked on flat stones, quick to vanish at the flicker of a shadow overhead. Larger creatures passed through the valleys, early reptiles and mammal-like beings, following the rivers, searching for the abundance that gathered in the foothills. And always the mountains spoke, not in words but in sounds, the whisper of wind over ridges, the rumble of distant thunder, the crash of falling stone. On quiet nights under sky crowded with stars, you could hear the groaning of glaciers, the cracking of ice as it shifted, the slow and patient breath of mountains themselves. They were not silent guardians, they were alive with the voice of earth, ancient and unhurried. At dawn, the peaks blazed with fire. The first rays of sunlight caught their crowns, painting snow and stone in shades of gold and rose, while the valleys below still lingered in shadow. At dusk, they darkened into silhouettes, violet against a sky that glowed with fading amber. The stars seemed closer here, so close you might imagine reaching out and touching them. To rest upon a mountain ledge, wrapped in the hush of thin air and the glow of moonlight, was to feel as though you stood between two worlds, the vast earth below and the endless heavens above. The mountains of Pangaea were reminders that the world was never still. They were the scars of collisions, the evidence of continents pressing together with irresistible force. They were the bones of the earth thrust skyward, marking the places where the planet's power could not be hidden. And though they would erode with time, their remnants still remain today, scattered across the continents that once were joined. The Appalachians, the Atlas, the Urals, whispers of a time when they were one chain, one spine of giants, binding Pangaea together. To walk these mountains was to walk the history of Earth. To stand upon them was to see the unity of a world. And to hear their whispers was to remember that even stone, seemingly eternal, is shaped by time, and that all greatness, even mountains, are part of a greater story of change. Above the deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains of Pangaea stretched a sky larger than anything we can imagine today. Without the dividing seas of modern continents to fracture the flow of air, without the lights of cities or the haze of industry, the heavens of the Triassic were raw, immense, and unbroken. The sky was not merely a backdrop to the land, it was a living presence, a vast and restless canvas that shaped the rhythm of every day and every night. By day, the sun commanded the world. Over the desert heart, it blazed with merciless intensity, bleaching stone into pale reds and golds, shimmering against the dunes until the air itself seemed to waver. The heat radiated upward, making the horizon ripple like water. Winds stirred the dust, sending plumes twisting skyward like faint smoke signals. Farther along the coasts, the sun softened, gilding the needles of conifers, turning rivers into shining silver ribbons, and casting sharp, warm light across rocky cliffs where the waves roared. But the sky was not always calm. Storms built across Pangaea with a fury that reflected the scale of the land itself. With no seas between to temper their growth, storms could swell into giants, stretching across hundreds of miles. The clouds rolled thick and black, piling high into towers that loomed above the mountains. Lightning split the heavens into silver-white veins, tearing through the darkness in sudden brilliance. Thunder followed, low and long, echoing across plains, resonating through valleys, rattling the bones of the supercontinent itself. Rain came in torrents, pounding forests, swelling rivers, soaking soil until it drank no more. And then, as suddenly as they had come, the storms passed, leaving behind skies freshly washed, horizons scrubbed clean, and air thick with the scent of wet stone and resin. Even in stillness, the skies carried stories. Winds traveled vast distances, sweeping over deserts with a dry hiss, sighing through forests with cool whispers, whistling down canyons in playful songs. Clouds gathered in shifting armies, sometimes thin and wispy, glowing orange at sunset, sometimes heavy and brooding, promising tempests. Their shadows painted the land in patterns of light and dark, changing with every hour. To look up was to watch the Earth's breath in motion, the atmosphere itself alive with wandering moods. At twilight, the skies transformed. The sun dipped low, spilling gold and crimson across the horizon. Mountains glowed in fire before sinking into a purple silhouette. Rivers caught the last light, shining like threads of molten metal. Along the coasts, the ocean mirrored the heavens, becoming a great canvas of rose and amber, where waves rose and fell in colors that seemed almost too rich to be real. In the deserts, the dunes blushed pink, their shadows growing long and soft, the day's heat bleeding away as cool winds stirred once more. And then came night, and with it, wonder. Without the haze of human lights, the stars blazed in numbers beyond comprehension. The Milky Way stretched as a silver river across the darkness, every star sharp and bright, every constellation brighter than it would ever be again in the eyes of humankind. Meteors flared in quick streaks, sparks burning across the black. The moon, closer in its orbit than today, loomed large, casting a pale, steady glow that turned rivers into ribbons of light and made forests shimmer in silver. Insects hummed softly, reptiles stirred, and the whole land seemed bathed in quiet magic. The skies of the Triassic were also a cradle for new experiments in flight. Insects had long claimed the air, their wings glinting in the sun as they darted among the trees and rivers. But now new forms were beginning to rise, the first pterosaurs. With wings stretched like sails of skin, they launched themselves from cliffs and treetops, catching the wind in graceful arcs. Some soared above the oceans, their shadows flickering on the waves below, diving with sudden precision for fish. Others skimmed river valleys, circling above forests, testing the air that had belonged only to insects. Their silhouettes, etched against sunsets, were the first hints of the dominion life would one day claim in the skies. To live beneath these skies was to live in a world of constant change. Days could blaze or soften, storms could rage or soothe, nights could silence or sing with starlight. The heavens shaped the moods of the land as much as the land shaped the lives upon it. And always, they were immense, larger, clearer, purer than we can imagine now. The skies of the Triassic were not simply above Pangaea. They were part of her, as much a presence as the deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains. They stretched endlessly, carrying storms and stars, winds and whispers, fire and moonlight. And in their vastness, every creature of Pangaea found its rhythm, the heat of day, the hush of twilight, the brilliance of night. To look up in that ancient age was to feel at once small and eternal. The sky was both infinite and intimate, a reminder that Earth, even in her immensity, always offered wonder to those who lifted their eyes. Beneath the great skis of the Triassic, across the deserts, forests, and river valleys of Pangaea, life pressed forward in quiet determination. The Earth was no longer silent after the great extinction. Slowly, carefully, creatures were returning, adapting to the extremes of this colossal land. The soil itself bore witness. Its rusty hues and ochre plains gave the land a name, the Red Earth. And upon this earth, the first true pioneers of the Mesozoic began to walk, crawl, and breathe. Imagine the landscape. The sun strikes the land at a low angle, filling the air with a golden glow. The soil is stained red with iron oxides, glowing almost as if the earth itself still smolders with ancient fire. Scattered shrubs cling to the dry slopes, while pockets of conifers and ferns cluster in valleys where water lingers. Across this rugged terrain, small creatures stir, their bodies low to the ground, their movements quick and wary. The earliest reptiles were everywhere. Small lizard-like forms scuttled across warm stones, their scales catching the light like burnished copper. They basked in the morning sun to warm their blood, then darted swiftly into shade when the heat became unbearable. Their claws scratched faint lines into the soil, their tails flicked as they chased insects. Each movement was purposeful, cautious, for in this age, survival depended on vigilance. Amphibians still clung to life as well, though diminished since their dominance in earlier ages. They lingered along riverbanks, their slick bodies gleaming in the dim light under ferns. They croaked and clicked softly, their throats pulsing as they called to one another. Some were large, their jaws lined with sharp teeth to seize unwary prey. They slid through muddy pools with ease, their movements smooth and sinuous. Others were small, hiding in shaded corners, relying on dampness to keep their skins alive. These creatures were remnants of an older world, yet they endured, coexisting with the newcomers who now claimed the land. Insects thrived everywhere, the quiet rulers of Pangaea. Beetles scurried across bark and soil, ants wove secret paths through roots, and dragonflies skimmed above shallow waters, their wings catching the sun in flashes of glassy brilliance. Some grew large by our modern standards, their size a testament to the rich oxygen that lingered in the atmosphere. Their hum filled the forests and plains, a constant background chorus, a reminder that even in an age dominated by reptiles, the small and numerous held sway. But the most remarkable of all were the new forms, the Ichthyosaurs, ancestors of creatures that would one day rise to greatness. They were leaner, faster, more agile than their predecessors. Some walked low to the ground, others lifted themselves upright on sturdy legs, a hint of what the future would bring. Their teeth were sharp, their senses keen, their eyes alert as they stalked insects, amphibians, and smaller reptiles. They were not yet the tyrants of later ages, but already they carried the promise of dominance in their bones. Picture one of these small Ichthyosaurs, no larger than a dog, its body covered in scales, its limbs tucked beneath it rather than sprawling to the side. It moves with a different gait, quicker, more efficient, a glimpse of the great dinosaurs to come. It pauses, head lifted, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of prey. Its tail sways slightly for balance, its claws flex. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it darts forward, seizing a lizard in its jaws. Dust rises around its feet, and in that moment, the red earth bears witness to the dawn of a new lineage. Life here was not only a struggle, it was also a symphony. Reptiles basked on stones, insects hummed in the air, amphibians croaked by pools, and early mammal-like creatures scurried through undergrowth, seeking shelter from predators. Together they filled the silence left by extinction, weaving new threads into the tapestry of life. Each creature, no matter how small, played a role in reshaping Pangaea's ecosystems. And all of it, every movement, every call, every step across the red earth, took place on a stage vast beyond imagining. To see a lizard basking on a sunlit stone, a dragonfly darting above a pool, or an Ichthyosaur pausing in the dust, was to glimpse the first rehearsals of what the Mesozoic would become. Great empires of life had not yet risen, but their foundations were already being laid. The red earth of Pangaea was not silent, not empty. It was alive with beginnings. It was a place of resilience, where survivors of catastrophe found new ways to endure, and where bold new experiments of life began to take shape. Here, upon the ochre soil and beneath the vast skies, the creatures of the red earth whispered of the future, a future that would belong to giants. While reptiles scurried over warm stones and amphibians lingered by rivers, another quieter story was unfolding across Pangaea. It was not written in tooth and claw, but in fronds and cones, in roots and seeds. It was the story of plants, spreading patiently, silently, weaving green across the supercontinent. And at the heart of this story were the seeds, tiny, unassuming travelers carried by the breath of the world. Picture the wind rising over the forests. It slips between towering conifers, sighing through their branches, loosening dry cones that have waited for the right moment to open. Seeds, small and light, are lifted into the air, twirling gently as they fall, then carried away, tumbling, floating, riding invisible currents. They drift over rivers, spiral above plains, and land softly upon distant soil. Each one carries within it the promise of a tree, a forest, a world reshaped. Conifers were the lords of these Triassic forests. Their trunks rose tall and straight, bark rough and sturdy, their crowns spread wide into green spires. They were ancient in form, their lineage stretching far into the Paleozoic, yet in Pangaea they flourished as never before. They grew in clusters along rivers, stood in proud ranks on mountain slopes, and even rooted themselves near the edges of deserts where moisture was rare but not absent. Their needles whispered endlessly in the breeze, a sound that filled the air like a soft hymn, a song of patience and endurance. Beneath their shade, cycads added a different rhythm. Shorter and stouter, with crowns of stiff, feathery fronds, they clustered like living statues, ancient and slow. Around them unfurled great carpets of ferns, delicate fronds spiraling outward, green upon green, softening the soil and drinking in the dim light beneath the canopy. Together, they formed layered worlds of shadow and texture, sanctuaries where insects hummed and reptiles slipped quietly through the undergrowth. The seeds of these plants were travelers. Some dropped close to their parent trees, falling into rich soil where they quickly took root. Others rode the wind for miles, skimming above rivers or tumbling across open plains before finding rest. Some floated on floodwaters, carried downstream to new valleys. A few never sprouted, lost to time and chance. But those that did anchored the forests of Pangaea, stitching green wherever the land would permit. Imagine walking through such a forest after rain. The air is heavy with the scent of resin and damp earth. The needles drip with silver droplets, each one catching the light as it falls. Beneath your feet, the ground is soft with moss and ferns, spongy with life. Around you, seeds cling to the soil, some sprouting tiny green shoots, others lying in wait, hidden but alive. Each one is a story about to begin, a life ready to root itself in the ancient soil. Beyond the forests, even the windswept edges of deserts felt the touch of seeds. There, in cracks between dunes, hardy plants thrust up green shoots, clinging desperately to survival. A single seed landing in such a place could transform a patch of barren soil into a small oasis, attracting insects, offering shade, and slowly softening the harshness of the land. These were the small miracles of Pangaea, tiny beginnings that carried immense consequence. The spread of plants reshaped everything. Their roots held soil in place, slowing erosion and feeding rivers with stability. Their leaves and fronds created shade, cooling the air beneath them. Their seeds offered food to small reptiles, amphibians, and insects. Their very breath, the oxygen they released, altered the sky, building the atmosphere that would one day nurture larger, more complex lives. Quietly, steadily, plants were preparing the earth for the giants to come. At sunset, seeds still drifted. They spun in the golden light, silhouettes dancing against the sky, gliding on breezes that carried them into the unknown. Some landed softly in fertile valleys, others nestled into cracks of stone, waiting for rain to awaken them. Each seed was a promise, a whisper of growth, a reminder that life spreads not only by bold conquest, but also by gentle patience. The seeds on the wind were the quiet wanderers of Pangaea. While creatures battled, hunted, and survived, the plants endured with subtle strength. They did not need speed or teeth or claws. They trusted time, wind, water, and chance. And in that trust, they spread forests across a continent, painting the world green again after the silence of extinction. The story of Pangaea was not only written in red earth and roaring storms, but also in these drifting seeds. Small, delicate, often unseen, yet powerful enough to shape the very face of the supercontinent. And as they flew on the breath of the world, They carried within them the memory of wholeness and the promise of futures yet to come. Encircling Pangaea, stretching farther than sight, lay the greatest sea the Earth has ever known, Panthalassa, the world ocean. It was not divided into Pacific and Atlantic, not broken into Indian or Arctic. It was one vast expanse, one unbroken body of water that wrapped the supercontinent like a blue eternity. To gaze upon, it was to gaze into infinity, a realm without end. Stand on the shore of Pangaea and listen. The ocean speaks. Waves rise and fall in rhythms older than memory, tumbling over one another, crashing against stone cliffs, or sweeping gently across long beaches of pale sand. Each wave carries a breath of the deep, the hiss of foam, the sigh of retreat, the constant heartbeat of water against land. This pulse never ceased. It was the voice of Panthalassa, steady, patient, eternal. The scale of this ocean was almost beyond comprehension. Currents looped around the globe in great gyres, carrying warmth and coolness, shaping weather across the supercontinent. Winds rose from its surface, heavy with moisture, rushing toward Pangaea's coasts to deliver rain and storms. Lightning forked across its endless skis, striking waters that churned beneath black clouds. Yet in other moments, the sea lay calm, shimmering like glass beneath the sun, its horizon unbroken save for the faint curve of the earth. Its surface was only the beginning. Beneath, the world teemed with life. Fish darted in glittering schools, moving as one body, flashing silver as they turned. Shelled creatures crept along the seabed, burrowing into sand, hiding among rocks, filtering food from the currents. Jelly-like forms pulsed slowly through the blue, their bodies luminous in shafts of light. And already, marine reptiles were beginning to test the deep, sleek ichthyosaurs shaped like dolphins, their bodies built for speed, gliding gracefully beneath the waves. They rose to the surface with quick, sharp breaths, their eyes keen, their forms vanishing again into the mystery below. Closer to shore, reefs began to gather. Primitive corals built stony skeletons that layered upon one another, creating havens for countless smaller lives. In the shallows, seaweeds swayed with the tides, forests of green drifting in the gentle pull of water. Crustaceans scuttled among them, their hard shells clicking softly as they moved. The water here was alive with sound and motion, the splash of reptiles surfacing, the rush of schools of fish, the faint, steady grinding of creatures feeding upon coral. At night, the ocean transformed into something otherworldly. Moonlight spilled across its surface, silvering each wave, turning the dark water into a shimmering expanse of light and shadow. In the shallows, bioluminescent creatures glowed faintly, their bodies sparking green and blue in the blackness. Each crest of a wave glittered like starlight, as though the heavens themselves had descended into the sea. The cries of seabirds echoed across the dark, haunting and lonely, as they circled above unseen currents. And beneath the waves, unseen, the deep ocean pulsed with life and silence, a world vast enough to swallow imagination whole. The pulse of Panthalassa was not merely sound, it was power. With every tide, sand shifted along the coasts, reshaping beaches, carving cliffs, creating estuaries where rivers met the sea. With every storm, waves surged inland, breaking stone, feeding soil with salt and silt. With every current, warmth and coolness were traded across the globe, feeding storms, shaping deserts, watering forests. Pangaea breathed through her ocean, just as the ocean lived through her. To walk along her shore was to feel this power, to know that the land, immense as it was only half the story. The sea was the other half, larger, deeper, older, eternal. Its pulse reminded every creature that Earth was not only stone and soil, but also water without end. And so Panthalassa circled Pangaea, a boundless blue horizon, eternal in its rhythm, endless in its reach. Its voice was the steady heartbeat of the world, a song that never stopped, a reminder that even when land breaks and mountains crumble, the ocean remains restless, patient, and alive. For millions of years, Pangaea stood whole, deserts sprawling, forests whispering, rivers winding, mountains thrust skyward, all bound together in one vast embrace. Yet beneath that unity deep within the earth, a different story was unfolding. The crust, though immense and strong, rested upon a mantle that was never still. Heat swelled, pressure built, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, cracks began to form. Pangaea, the colossus of continents, was already destined to fracture. It began subtly, with rumbles that few living creatures could notice. In valleys, the ground sometimes quivered, a faint tremor like the heartbeat of stone. Along mountains, fissures opened where once there had been none, narrow, jagged wounds in the earth. Springs bubbled up from unseen depths, steaming with heat drawn from the mantle. In some places, thin lines of fire seared upward, molten rock forcing its way through fractures, glowing red against the night. These were whispers, not shouts, but the earth was speaking. Change was coming. Volcanoes became heralds of this unrest. Their cones rose silently at first, sculpted by slow eruptions, then roared to life with sudden fury. Ash billowed into the skies, darkening the horizon, turning days into twilight. Rivers of lava spilled across the land, glowing orange and crimson as they rolled downhill, solidifying into black stone as they cooled. The air filled with the acrid tang of smoke and sulfur carried for miles on the winds. Creatures fled, rivers hissed under sheets of molten rock, forests smoldered. Yet from this destruction came renewal, fresh soil, rich in minerals, feeding the next cycle of growth. The earth was tearing herself open, but she was also preparing for futures yet unseen. Rift valleys appeared, long scars stretching across the land. Imagine walking through one, walls of stone rising on either side, their cliffs jagged, their surfaces split and broken. The ground underfoot uneven, littered with boulders loosened by quakes. In the center, lakes began to gather where water filled the sinking ground, their still surfaces reflecting the cliffs above. Around these lakes, life flourished in unexpected abundance, reeds clustering along the edges, amphibians croaking in chorus, insects darting over the water. Even in fracture, Earth gave birth to sanctuaries. These cracks and rifts were the first hints of oceans not yet born. With time, they would widen, deepen, and flood, dividing the colossus of continents into pieces. But for now, they were narrow, tentative, almost secret. Only the Earth herself knew the destiny they carried, the slow unmaking of her wholeness, the first steps toward the scattered map we know today. At night, the fractures glowed faintly with heat. Steam rose from fissures, curling upward into the starlight. In the distance, volcanoes glimmered red, their molten rivers painting the horizon with fire. The stars shone cold and eternal above, but beneath them, the earth stirred restlessly, as though unable to remain still beneath her blanket of land. For creatures huddled in forests or resting in burrows, the ground was both foundation and threat, always steady until the moment it shivered with ancient power. And yet life endured. Reptiles basked upon cooled lava flows, their scales gleaming in the sun. Plants rooted themselves in fresh volcanic soil, their green fronds unfurling where once there had been fire. Insects returned, birds' ancestors tested the air above the new valleys, and rivers carved paths through the cracks, weaving life back into the broken places. Even as the continent fractured, it healed slowly, patiently, eternally. The fractures of Pangaea were quiet beginnings, the first breaths of a great transformation. No creature then could know that these rifts would widen into seas, that one day vast oceans would divide the land. But the earth knew. Beneath her surface, heat and movement whispered of inevitability. Unity was temporary, change was forever. The colossus of continents was beginning to yield, to shift, to break. Yet in its breaking, the earth was not ending one story, she was preparing for another. Pangaea was immense, a colossus of land that offered abundance and hardship in equal measure. Its deserts burned with heat, its mountains scraped the sky, its rivers wound like silver threads through stone, and its coast stretched endlessly against the pulse of Panthalassa. To survive here required patience, resilience, and above all, adaptability. And so life learned to bend. Life found its places, its corners, its shadows and sunlight. Life found its niches. Across the open plains, reptiles scuttled over sun-warmed rocks, their scales gleaming bronze and gold. Some were no larger than a human hand, feeding on insects that hovered in the grasses. Others grew larger, their bodies thick with muscle, their tails sweeping the dust as they stalked prey. They were quick and cautious, eyes sharp, always watching the horizon for movement. On cool mornings, they basked in the rising sun, soaking in warmth before the day turned harsh. At midday, they vanished into burrows or crevices, hiding until the heat passed. Every movement was calculated, every action a careful dance between hunger and safety. Near rivers, amphibians clung stubbornly to their watery homes. They were survivors of another age, creatures of both water and land. Some were broad-headed, lurking in shallow pools, their jaws lined with teeth to snatch fish or unwary reptiles. Others were smaller, hiding among reeds, calling into the twilight with croaks that echoed across the water. Though their reign had diminished since earlier eras, they endured, finding refuge in streams and lakes, niches carved from water in a land often dry. Forests offered their own niches, layered worlds of shadow and green. Insects hummed among ferns, beetles bored into bark, and dragonflies skimmed through shafts of light. Tiny reptiles slipped through undergrowth, their bodies slender, their scales patterned to vanish against fallen needles. Early mammal-like creatures, no larger than mice, crept silently under roots and leaves, their soft fur a new experiment in life's design. They emerged at night, when the forest grew cool, scurrying in search of insects and seeds. Fragile, cautious, easily overlooked, yet persistent, these small beings carried in their quiet bodies the future of mammals yet to come. The skis, too, were becoming a frontier. Insects had long claimed them, their wings glittering in the sunlight as they darted over rivers and meadows. But now, the first pterosaurs tested the air. With wings stretched wide like sails of skin, they leapt from cliffs and treetops, catching the wind in graceful arcs. Some were small, gliding clumsily from branch to branch. Others grew larger, learning to soar above the coasts, diving for fish with sudden precision. They were awkward yet bold, pioneers of a realm that had never before belonged to reptiles. Their silhouettes traced against sunsets were glimpses of a future where the skis themselves would be claimed by giants. Even the deserts, barren and harsh, offered niches to those who could endure them. Reptiles burrowed into the sand, escaping the worst of the heat. Insects emerged only at dusk, riding the cool winds that swept across the dunes. Hardy shrubs anchored themselves in cracks, spreading seeds that waited patiently for rain. When storms finally came, brief and rare, the desert bloomed overnight, flowers opening like flames, insects swarming in clouds, reptiles feasting before the land returned once more to silence. It was a cycle of patience, a niche carved from extremes. The oceans along Pangaea's coasts held their own worlds of opportunity. Ichthyosaurs darted through the waves, their bodies streamlined for speed, chasing fish in swift pursuit. Smaller reptiles skimmed the shallows, snapping at crustaceans and early mollusks. In the reefs, countless creatures hid among coral, each one tucked into a crevice, each one finding safety in the crowded maze of stone. The sea, like the land, was full of niches waiting to be filled, and life spilled into them eagerly. Everywhere life learned to specialize. Some creatures became sprinters, darting for prey before vanishing into cover. Others became burrowers, safe in the cool soil beneath the heat. Some hunted by sight, sharp eyes piercing the shadows, others hunted by patience, waiting motionless for hours until a careless movement betrayed their prey. Some fed at night, when the world was cooler, while others claimed the day, thriving in sunlight. Each niche was a thread in the great fabric of Pangaea, woven together to create an ecosystem vast and complex. And in this quiet weaving, the stage was set for the future, for the niches that reptiles claimed would grow into the empires of dinosaurs. The niches that tiny mammal-like creatures clung to would one day open into whole worlds of opportunity. The niches of the skis, tested by insects and pterosaurs, would become the realms of birds. Pangaea was not only the land of the present, it was the workshop of the future, a place where experiments unfolded in silence, where resilience built legacies. To walk through Pangaea was to see life's ingenuity in every shadow, every pool, every tree, every dune. The land was harsh, the climate extreme, the earth restless beneath her surface. And yet life endured, life thrived, life found its niches. When the sun slipped beyond the edge of Panthalassa and the last golden light withdrew from deserts, forests, and rivers, Pangaea changed. The burning brilliance of day gave way to the cool embrace of night, and the supercontinent revealed another side of itself, quiet, vast, and filled with wonder. Imagine standing on a high ridge as dusk deepens. The sky glows with fading amber, the horizon softened into hues of violet and rose. The air cools, the day's heat bleeding away, and a hush settles over the land. Shadows stretch long across the ground, dunes turning purple, forests darkening into silhouettes, rivers gleaming faintly with the last rays of sun. The voices of day, the chirr of insects, the scurry of reptiles, the croaks of amphibians soften, and in their place, new sounds stir. Stars appear one by one, at first faint, then brighter, until the heavens blaze with a brilliance unknown to modern eyes. The Milky Way cuts a river of silver across the black, a luminous band so bright it casts a faint glow upon the land. Meteors streak across the sky, momentary sparks burning and vanishing in silence. The moon, nearer then than it is now, looms larger, casting pale, silvery light over mountains and plains. Under its glow, rivers shine like threads of glass, deserts glimmer with ghostly light, and forests shimmer with shifting shadows. In this silverlit world, life moves differently. Tiny mammals, soft-furred and cautious, emerge from burrows and roots. They scurry silently across the forest floor, their small bodies quick and nimble, their eyes wide to catch the faintest glimmers of light. They seek seeds, insects, and grubs, feeding in the safety of darkness, away from predators of the day. These small creatures are unremarkable to the age they live in, yet in their fur, their quickness, and their caution, they carry the promise of a future far beyond their own. Insects fill the air with faint music. Crickets, or their ancient kin, rub wings together, creating soft rhythms in the grass. Fireflies drift in clusters, their bodies glowing with pale green light, small lanterns bobbing among reeds and low shrubs. Dragonflies rest on stalks near rivers, their wings catching moonlight in fragile glimmers. The night is alive with tiny lights, movements, and songs, weaving a tapestry of life delicate yet persistent. Reptiles, too, claim the night. Some bask in the lingering warmth of rocks that still hold the sun's memory, their scales glowing faintly in moonlight. Others hunt silently, moving through the undergrowth, eyes gleaming as they stalk insects or small mammals. Amphibians call from the edges of pools, their voices echoing across still water, a chorus that rises and falls in endless patterns like chants sung to the stars. Above, the skies belong to pioneers. Pterosaurs launch from cliffs and tall conifers, their wide wings catching moonlit air. They glide across rivers, shadows passing silently over the water. Some dive suddenly, wings folding, seizing fish with sharp jaws before lifting again into the starlit sky. Their cries echo faintly, sharp notes carried by night winds, strange music in a dark world. Though awkward in some movements, they are masters in others, already reshaping the rules of life by claiming the air under the stars. The nights of Pangaea were also the stage for silence, a silence so profound that it hummed in the ears. Stand in the desert under moonlight, and the hush is total. The dunes glow softly, their curves sculpted silver by the moon, their shadows deep and blue. The wind hisses faintly, sand sliding in slow trickles, but otherwise all is still. Lift your eyes, and you see only stars, countless, eternal, cold, and bright. The vastness of Earth's wholeness beneath you, the infinity of space above. Between the two, you feel yourself small and fragile, yet part of a greater harmony. In forests, the silence is different, layered, living. Leaves stir softly in the breeze, branches creak, insects drone faintly. Now and then, a splash from the river breaks the quiet, or the sudden cry of a hunting reptile pierces the air. But the silence always returns, wrapping everything in a blanket of shadow and calm. To walk beneath the canopy at night is to walk within a dream, green shadows softened into black, air heavy with resin and damp earth, the path lit only by moonlight filtering through needles and fronds. The night over Pangaea was not empty, it was full of stories. Stories written in the soft scurry of mammals, the glitter of insects, the glide of pterosaurs, the croak of amphibians. Stories painted in silver by the moon, written in fire by the stars, whispered in the hush of wind. It was the other face of the supercontinent, gentler than day, yet just as immense. And always, the night reminded every creature, small or large, hidden or bold, that the earth was vast, unified, and alive. Pangaea under starlight was not merely a continent, it was a world gathered whole, dreaming under the endless heavens. Pangaea was a land of extremes, and nowhere was this more evident than in its storms. Over deserts, mountains, coasts, and plains, the skies could change with startling suddenness, unleashing tempests of a scale rarely seen in the world we know today. For with one great continent to span, and one boundless ocean to feed them, storms had no borders. They could stretch across horizons, growing to monstrous size, rolling unbroken over thousands of miles. Imagine a summer afternoon in the heart of Pangaea's desert. The sun bakes the red soil until it cracks, the air shimmers with heat, and silence reigns. Then, far in the distance, clouds begin to gather, small at first, then swelling, darkening, piling higher and higher until they tower like mountains of vapor. The light dims, the horizon bruises purple, and the wind shifts, carrying the scent of rain before a single drop has fallen. The first thunderclap rolls like a drumbeat across the land. It is deep and long, echoing through valleys, rumbling over plains. Then another, closer, louder, shaking the very bones of the earth. Lightning forks downward in jagged brilliance, striking sand, igniting dry shrubs, searing the air with sudden fire. For a moment, the land is white as day. For a moment, the shadows leap and vanish. Then darkness returns, followed by thunder that splits the sky. When the rain arrives, it does not whisper. It roars. Sheets of water crash down in torrents, hissing against hot stone, drumming upon the earth with relentless force. In minutes, dry gullies become streams, streams become rivers, and rivers burst their banks, surging wildly across the land. Pools form in low places, filling with water that teems almost instantly with insect life. Plants lift their leaves to drink deeply, their roots swelling with new strength. Amphibians, dormant for weeks, emerge joyfully, their calls rising in loud choruses that echo against the storm's roar. Yet storms were not only drenching rains. Dust storms, too, haunted Pangaea's interior. Winds gathered strength over deserts, sweeping dunes into motion. Whole walls of sand lifted skyward, blotting out the sun, turning day into an ochre twilight. The air choked with grit, the sky a rolling tide of dust, dunes reshaped in hours into new forms. For creatures caught in their path, survival meant burrowing deep, clinging to roots, or enduring until the storm had passed. When the winds finally stilled, silence fell heavy, and the land seemed changed. Sand piled where valleys once lay, stones newly bared, trails of creatures buried beneath. Along the coasts, storms took on an ocean's fury. Winds rose over Panthalassa, whipping the waves into mountains of water that thundered against cliffs. The spray shot high into the air, drenching forests with salt. Pterosaurs were tossed on wild winds, their wings struggling against the chaos of air. Lightning flashed upon the sea, illuminating the sleek backs of Ichthyosaurs as they surfaced for breath. The shoreline was remade with every great storm, beaches swallowed, cliffs gnawed, tide pools created anew. But storms also brought renewal. In deserts, their rains awakened seeds that had lain hidden for months or years. Overnight, flowers erupted across the sand, bright blooms painting the land in colors that vanished as swiftly as they appeared. In forests, the rain washed dust from needles, filled streams, and freshened the air until it was heavy with the perfume of resin and wet earth. On the plains, grasses surged with sudden growth, offering food for creatures that grazed or hunted in their shadows. Even the violence of storms carried life in their wake. At night, storms were awe and terror combined. The land lit again and again by lightning, the sky veined with white fire. Thunder cracked and rolled, louder than mountains falling. Rain pounded upon every surface, filling the darkness with an endless rhythm. And yet, for all their fury, storms had a strange coziness too. To be sheltered beneath the thick boughs of a conifer, within a burrow in the hollow of a canyon, was to hear the storm rage outside while knowing safety in your small corner. The drumming of rain became a lullaby, the crash of thunder a distant drum, the winds howl a song that carried you into sleep. Storms across the supercontinent were reminders that Pangaea was not still, not gentle, not passive. She was alive, restless, immense. Her storms sculpted her deserts, fed her rivers, refreshed her forests, and tested every creature that lived upon her. To endure a storm was to endure Pangaea herself, to face her power, and if you survived, to be shaped by it. And so, over millions of years, storms came and went. Each one a breath of the planet, a heartbeat of the sky. Their echoes live still in stone and soil, in riverbeds carved deep, in dunes piled high. They were the voices of a world immense and unified, a world still gathering its strength before the great fracturing yet to come. Though Pangaea seemed eternal, a land so vast it stretched from pole to pole, the earth beneath it was never still. For millions of years, the supercontinent stood whole, but deep below, the mantle stirred with heat, restless currents pressing upward against the crust. Pressure gathered in silence, spreading like tension through stone. Cracks opened where none had been before. Valleys deepened. Volcanoes roared. The earth was whispering her secret. Even the mightiest unity cannot last forever. At first, the signs were subtle, easy to overlook. In places where rivers once meandered peacefully, fissures began to widen, their banks crumbling as the ground pulled apart. Springs bubbled hot and mineral-rich from new seams, their steam curling upward into the morning air. The soil cracked in patterns too straight to be chance, lines of weakness stretching like veins through the red earth. To a creature living there, a reptile basking on a stone, an amphibian crouched in the shade, nothing seemed to change from day to day. But in the slow rhythm of deep time, the land was shifting. Volcanoes announced the restlessness most clearly. Along fault lines, they rose suddenly, cones of ash and stone that grew taller with each eruption. Smoke billowed into the sky, darkening horizons, scattering sunlight into eerie hues of orange and red. Lava poured across plains in glowing rivers, cooling into black rock that split and cracked as it hardened. Forests burned, rivers boiled, creatures fled before walls of fire. And yet in time, life returned to these scarred places. Ferns rooted in the cooling ash, insects explored the new stone, and reptiles wandered across the dark, brittle crust. Renewal always followed destruction, but the message was clear: the earth was tearing at her seams. Rift valleys stretched wider, long scars in the continent's body. Imagine walking into one of these valleys. Sheer cliffs rise on either side, streaked with colors of stone laid down through ages. At the base, lakes gather, their still surfaces reflecting the jagged walls above. Waterfalls tumble down from cracks, spraying the air with mist. The ground is uneven, littered with boulders loosened by ancient quakes. Around the lakes, reeds and ferns thrive, amphibians sing, insects buzz, a fragile oasis born in a wound. These valleys were the first whispers of oceans yet unborn, places where the earth rehearsed the act of division. Even the animals felt these whispers, though they could not name them. Quakes rattled the ground, startling reptiles into sudden flight. Pterosaurs launched awkwardly into the air when trees shuddered around them. Amphibians stirred uneasily in their pools when ripples trembled the surface without wind. To them, the world seemed unpredictable, shifting beneath their claws and scales. Yet still they adapted, as they always had, finding ways to endure. At night the whispers were visible. In the darkness, fissures glowed faintly red, molten fire flickering deep below. Steam hissed upward, curling into the starlit air, carrying the scent of sulfur. From afar, volcanoes glimmered like lanterns against the horizon, their crowns glowing with hidden fire. The stars wheeled above, steady and eternal, but beneath them the earth murmured of change. It was as if the continent itself sighed in its sleep, restless, uneasy, preparing to awaken. The whispers grew louder with time. Valleys widened, faults deepened, volcanoes multiplied. The land groaned as though stretched too far, it seems beginning to pull. To the creatures of Pangaea, life went on, reptiles hunted, insects swarmed, seeds drifted, but beneath their feet, a grander story was unfolding. A story not of days or years, but of millions of years, written in the slow language of stone. Unity is never forever. The earth knew this, even if her creatures did not. Pangaea, mighty as she was, carried within her the seeds of her undoing. And though her breaking would take ages yet to come, already the whispers of separation stirred, the quiet promise that one day, the world of one would become the world of many. If the coasts of Pangaea were alive with forests and rivers, if the mountains boomed with glaciers and thunder, then the interior of the supercontinent told a different story. Far from the softening touch of Panthalassa's winds, far from rivers swollen by rain, the heart of Pangaea was a place of extremes. Here the land baked beneath the sun, cracked under drought, froze in long winters, and stretched endlessly in silence. To live here was to endure. To survive here was to struggle. The soil itself betrayed the hardship. It was red with iron, dry and powdery, turning to dust at the slightest breath of wind. Rain seldom reached this far inland, and when it did, it came in violent bursts, carving gullies and washes through the barren plains. Most of the time the sky was clear, the air heavy with heat by day and sharp with cold by night. Nothing softened the climate, no nearby sea to regulate its moods. The heart of Pangaea bore the full brunt of extremes. Yet even here, life clung with stubborn grace. Hardy plants rooted themselves in cracks of stone, their bodies low and twisted, conserving every drop of moisture. Shrubs bore thick leaves, waxy and small, armored against the sun's harshness. Some dropped their seeds into the soil, waiting months, even years, until the rare blessing of rain would awaken them. When that moment came, the land bloomed suddenly, explosively, flowers bursting from the dry earth in colors of gold, violet, and crimson, painting the desert as if a hidden palette had been spilled across it. For days or weeks, insects feasted, reptiles hunted, Amphibians croaked in temporary pools. Then, just as quickly, the blooms faded, leaving seeds behind to wait again. Creatures endured by carving out their own niches. Reptiles burrowed deep into sand and soil, escaping the punishing heat of day, surfacing only in the cool of morning or dusk. Their scales were tough, reflecting sunlight, conserving water. They moved swiftly, pausing often to raise their heads, scanning the air for danger or opportunity. Insects hummed low, many of them nocturnal, emerging under the cover of stars to search for nectar or carrion. Amphibians lingered near rare springs and seasonal streams, their lives tied completely to the fickle gift of water. Predators prowled here too. Small Ichthyosaurs tested their speed across open plains, lean and wiry, their eyes keen in the low light of dawn. They hunted quick-footed lizards, insects, even one another, each day in a contest of endurance and sharpness. Their bodies, upright and agile, hinted at what was to come in later ages, the stride of dinosaurs, the legacy of hunters who would one day dominate. But for now they lived in struggle, every meal uncertain, every night a test of survival. The land itself carried scars of hardship. Dunes shifted restlessly under winds, their ridges moving year after year, swallowing valleys, revealing old bones bleached white by sun. Salt flats stretched like mirrors, their surfaces crusted with white, glittering painfully under the glare of midday. Canyons gaped where rivers once ran, now silent, their stone walls recording the memory of waters that no longer flowed. To wander through the interior was to walk a museum of hardship, every landscape a record of extremes endured. And yet, for all its severity, the interior of Pangaea had its beauty. At sunrise, the desert glowed with soft hues of pink and lavender, the shadows of dunes stretching long and delicate. By day, mirages shimmered, turning horizons into illusions of water. At twilight, the land blushed gold again, cooling under the breath of evening winds. And at night, the stars blazed with unmatched brilliance, their cold fire mirrored faintly on the pale sands. Even in struggle, even in scarcity, there was wonder. The interior of Pangaea was a crucible. It tested every plant, every insect, every reptile that called it home. Those that endured grew resilient, their bodies shaped by the land's demands, their lives attuned to rhythms of patience and endurance. They were survivors not because they conquered the land, but because they bent to it, matched its pace, accepted its harsh gifts. In this struggle, the seeds of future greatness were sown. The toughness of reptiles, the adaptability of small mammals, the patience of plants, all were sharpened here in the furnace of Pangaea's heart. And though the interior seemed quiet, lifeless, even cruel, it was in truth a place of forging, where life learned the strength it would need for ages yet to come. The heart of Pangaea was never kind, but it was honest, demanding, and real. It whispered one lesson to every creature that crawled, flew, or rooted within it. To survive here was to endure, and endurance was the key to life's future. If the heart of Pangaea tested life with heat and silence, then its coasts offered relief. Here, where the supercontinent met Panthalassa, the air softened, rains fell more generously, and abundance gathered. The edges of Pangaea were thresholds, places where rivers emptied their silver veins into the sea, where forests leaned toward the salt wind, where the boundaries between water and stone blurred in the rhythm of tides. Along these shores, the land bloomed. Imagine walking along such a coast at dawn. The sky glows with pale fire, the first light spreading across waves that roll in steady rhythm. The tide is low, revealing wide flats of sand rippled with patterns, tide pools glimmering like mirrors, and rocky shelves slick with spray. In the pools, tiny universes of life stir awake, fish with quicksilver bodies darting in sudden flashes, soft-bodied creatures opening and closing feathery arms to sift the water-shelled animals creeping slowly across stone. Above them, insects drift on breezes, their wings catching the light like shards of glass. Forests clustered near these coasts, thriving in the moist air. Conifers stood tall, their crowns swaying in the sea breeze, their needles whispering as gull-like cries echoed overhead. Cycads and ferns crowded beneath them, their fronds glistening with dew carried inland by the night winds. Here, plants found fertile soil and seeds scattered easily, carried by storms and tides. Insects buzzed busily through the canopy, reptiles warmed themselves on sunlit stones, and amphibians croaked from shaded streams that trickled into the sea. It was a green edge to a red continent, a fringe of life hugging the boundary of land and water. The waters themselves teemed with richness. Shallows shimmered with schools of fish, each individual small, but together forming vast, shimmering clouds that twisted and turned in unison. Larger hunters stalked these shoals, striking with sudden force, scattering the fish into dazzling bursts of silver. In deeper channels, Ichthyosaurs surged gracefully, their sleek forms cutting through the water like arrows, surfacing to breathe before vanishing again into the blue. Other reptiles, with long necks and paddle-like limbs, skimmed along the coasts, their heads darting suddenly into the shallows to snatch unwary prey. These were the new architects of the sea, creatures rising to claim an empire that had once belonged only to fish. Above the waves, the air belonged to pioneers. Pterosaurs launched from cliffs and rocky ledges, their wings stretched wide to catch the sea winds. Some soared high, circling over the waves with cries sharp and piercing, their shadows sweeping across the surf. Others skimmed close to the water, dipping their jaws for fish before beating upward again into the air. They nested along cliffs, their young clambering awkwardly until they too could take to the sky. The coasts were their stage, their proving ground, a place where air, land, and sea all offered sustenance. At midday, the coast shimmered with light. The sea glittered blue and silver, waves crashing against cliffs in bursts of spray, mist hanging in the air. Forests glowed green in the sunlight, their shadows stretching across sandy beaches. The cries of seabird ancestors mingled with the hiss of waves, the hum of insects, the splash of reptiles diving into the surf. Everywhere, the world seemed alive with motion and sound, a chorus of abundance that contrasted sharply with the silence of Pangaea's interior. And then came evening, when the coast revealed its softer side. The sun dipped low, spilling gold across the waves, painting the sky in crimson and violet. The tide rolled in, filling pools once more, sweeping over sand that still glowed faintly with heat. The air cooled, carrying the briny perfume of seaweed and salt. Pterosaurs wheeled against the fire of the sky, their silhouettes sharp and dark. On the beaches, small reptiles left delicate trails in the wet sand, their footprints temporary, soon to be erased by the tide. Night along the coast was its own world of wonder. The sea glowed faintly with bioluminescent sparks, tiny creatures in the surf lighting the waves in eerie blue-green flashes. Moonlight shimmered on the rolling water, turning it into a silver plain stretching to the horizon. Forests stood dark and whispering at the edge, their shadows deep, their branches swaying with the night wind. The cries of nocturnal animals carried softly across the shore, mingling with the eternal rhythm of the waves. The coasts of Pangaea were more than borders, they were places of meeting. Here, rivers met oceans, forests met sand, winds met tides, and life mingled in abundance. These blooming edges were sanctuaries, full of food and shelter, full of opportunity. They were places where experiments in life flourished, amphibians thriving in estuaries, reptiles mastering the sea, winged creatures claiming the air. While the continent's heart demanded endurance, the coasts offered reward. And so life bloomed here, in salt and spray, in shadow and sun. It was in these places, where earth and water embraced, that the story of Pangaea shone brightest, alive with promise, alive with possibility. For millions of years, Pangaea held together, vast and unbroken. It was the colossus of continents, the unified stage for deserts, forests, mountains, rivers, and coasts. But even the greatest forms of wholeness are not eternal. Beneath the surface, the mantle seethed with heat, restless currents of molten rock pressing upward. Pressure built in silence year after year until cracks widened, valleys deepened, and the supercontinent began to yield. The giant was breaking. Imagine standing in one of those rift valleys during the dawn of separation. The land itself seemed uneasy, scarred by fractures that split the ground into sharp walls of stone. Steam hissed from fissures, carrying the scent of sulfur. Lakes gathered in the sinking basins, reflecting cliffs that loomed jagged above. At night, faint glows of fire flickered from deep cracks, molten rock rising in slow, fiery breaths. It was as though the earth herself had been wounded, and her blood, red and glowing, seeped into the open air. Volcanoes flared across these fault zones. Some erupted quietly, spilling lava in slow, glowing rivers that hardened into black stone. Others erupted violently, fountains of fire clawing at the sky, clouds of ash blotting out the sun, thunder rumbling as the earth shook. Forests burned in sudden infernos, rivers hissed into steam, and creatures fled in confusion. Yet in time, as always, the destruction gave way to renewal. Ash enriched the soil, green shoots sprouted in the cooling fields, insects and reptiles returned. The land was scarred, but alive. The breaking of Pangaea was not swift. It was a process measured not in years, not in centuries, but in millions upon millions of years. At first, the cracks were narrow, only valleys, but slowly, steadily they widened. Water from rivers poured into the rifts, forming long, narrow lakes. With time, these lakes deepened and spread, becoming seas. And still the continents pulled farther apart, the giant loosening her grip, her unity slipping away. To the creatures who lived upon her, the changes were subtle. A reptile basking on a stone would not know the rift beneath it was widening. A pterosaur wheeling above a valley would not realize it was flying over the ullust outlines of oceans yet to come. Life continued in its daily rhythm, hunting, feeding, nesting, surviving, unaware that the very ground beneath was shifting, preparing a future of separate worlds. And yet the signs were unmistakable to the earth herself. The land trembled with quakes, rivers shifted their courses, mountain ranges lifted anew as pressure found release. Chains of volcanoes rose along fault lines, glowing at dusk like a necklace of fire. Deserts shifted, reshaped by new winds as the continents stretched apart. Oceans stirred differently, their currents adjusting to new coastlines that had only begun to form. The balance of the world was changing. The breaking of giants was not only a physical event, it was symbolic. Pangaea had been wholeness, unity, a single body holding the earth together. Its breaking marked the beginning of diversity, new continents, new climates, new opportunities for life. Where once there was one vast desert, there would one day be savannas, jungles, prairies, and forests. Where once there was one endless coastline, there would be many, each unique, each blooming with its own life. The world was preparing for its scattering, for the mosaic of lands and seas we know today. At sunset, standing upon the edge of a rift valley, you might have felt awe and unease in equal measure. The land beneath your feet cracked open into shadows, glowing faintly with hidden fire. The air trembled with distant rumbles. The horizon stretched into haze, broken by the jagged silhouettes of volcanoes. Above it all, the sky burned crimson and violet, the last light of day mirrored in the still waters of a rift lake. It was beautiful. It was unsettling. It was the earth reminding her children that nothing, not even giants, lasts forever. The breaking of Pangaea was slow, patient, and inevitable, and though the creatures of that age did not know it, they were living through the turning of a page, the closing of one story and the opening of countless others. The continent was breaking, the giant was falling apart, and in that breaking, the seeds of the modern world were sown. The first cracks of Pangaea began as valleys, scars carved into the stone where the continent stretched and split. For ages, they were narrow, dry, lined with lakes and rivers, but slowly, steadily they widened, they deepened, and then one day in the vast calendar of Earth, the sea rushed in. What had been rift became coastline, what had been wound became water. The Earth, once whole, began to scatter, and in that scattering, new oceans were born. Imagine standing at the edge of one such newborn sea. The ground that once stretched endlessly inland now falls away to a glimmering expanse of blue. Salt water rolls in with the tide, filling valleys that for millions of years had only known rivers. Waves lap against fresh cliffs of stone, their faces raw and sharp, newly broken by tectonic force. The air smells of salt where it never has before. Seabirds, ancestors, cry sharply above, testing the new winds, circling above a horizon that had never existed. At first, these oceans were narrow, stretching like long fingers between cliffs. Their waters shimmered green and blue, mixing fresh river flow with briny tides. In some places, they formed chains of lakes connected to the sea, their surfaces calm, their banks lined with reeds and ferns. In others, the water surged powerfully inland, carving estuaries, flooding forests, transforming valleys into bays. Reptiles and amphibians that once prowled riverbanks now found themselves facing waves and tides, while new creatures, sleek and strong, swam eagerly into the expanding blue. Volcanoes marked many of these rifts. Along the newborn shores, cones of stone rose jagged and smoking, spewing fire even as the sea hissed against their flows. Lava tumbled into the water in glowing rivers, exploding into steam, hardening into black, glassy rock. Islands were born in these eruptions, dots of stone rising from the waves, already claimed by seeds carried on the wind and the wings of insects. The land was breaking, But in that breaking, it was also creating new coasts, new islands, new places for life to test its reach. Marine reptiles found opportunity in these newborn seas. Ichthyosaurs darted through the shallows, sleek and silver, chasing schools of fish that now filled the rift waters. Long-necked plesiosaurs glided gracefully, their paddle-like limbs carving smooth arcs through the water as they hunted along the coasts. Even smaller reptiles adapted, skimming tidal pools, hunting crustaceans, feasting on the bounty of the new shores. These seas were narrow compared to Panthalassa, but they were nurseries of diversity, new worlds where creatures could flourish. Along the beaches, forests leaned toward the waves. Conifers spread their roots into damp soil enriched with salt and silt, their trunks rising above ferns and cycads that clustered in the shade. Seeds drifted across the waters, carried by tides to distant shores. Some took root, sprouting green on volcanic islands still steaming from their birth. Each seed was a bridge, stitching green threads across the fresh blue veins of the earth. At twilight, the newborn oceans glowed with quiet beauty. The sky blushed gold and crimson, mirrored in the waters below. Waves lapped softly against cliffs, carrying the scent of salt and life into the air. Insects hummed in the forests, amphibians croaked from the wetlands, pterosaurs wheeled above the surf, their silhouettes sharp against the fire of the sky. The land no longer felt seamless, but the new divisions brought with them freshness, variety, change. And at night, the seas became mirrors for the stars. The Milky Way spilled across their dark surfaces, glittering as though the sky itself had fallen into the water. Bioluminescent sparks flashed faintly in the shallows, tiny creatures glowing in waves that rolled silver under the moon. The air was cool, the land quiet, the ocean's pulse steady, a rhythm both new and eternal. These newborn oceans were more than water, they were promises. Promises of continents drifting apart, of climates diversifying, of new habitats opening for life. The breaking of Pangaea was no longer only fracture and fire, it was creation. Creation of seas that would, in time, become the familiar oceans of our world. To witness their birth was to see the earth remaking herself. To stand on those shores was to hear the first whispers of the map we know today. And to watch the waves roll into valleys that once held rivers was to understand a simple truth. Even in breaking, even in scattering, the earth is always becoming something new. When the first oceans seeped into the fractures of Pangaea, the world changed forever. What had once been one unbroken landmass now began to split into pieces. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the colossus loosened its grip, and those pieces drifted apart, carried by the deep, patient hands of the earth. With every widening rift, with every mile of water that filled the space between, new worlds began to emerge. Imagine standing at a place where once the land had stretched unbroken into the horizon, only now to find a sea rolling endlessly in its place. Across the water, a distant coastline is visible, familiar in its rocks and trees, yet unreachable except by crossing waves. The land is no longer seamless. Borders have been born, not of walls or barriers, but of oceans, vast and untamed. To creatures that had once roamed freely across the continent, these divisions reshaped everything. What had been one world was now becoming many. On one side of the divide, climates shifted. Rains fell more generously, carried inland by fresh ocean winds. Forests thickened, rivers swelled, wetlands spread. Life thrived in this new abundance, amphibians multiplied, insects hummed in clouds, reptiles found richer hunting grounds. On the other side, cut off from ocean moisture, the land grew drier. Deserts expanded, sands swallowed valleys, shrubs twisted under the sun. The same continent, once united, now held contrasting worlds, one lush, one barren, each shaping its inhabitants in different ways. Forests too began to diverge. Along wetter coasts, conifers grew taller, their canopies darker and denser, while cycads spread in thick groves, their stiff fronds forming evergreen crowns. Ferns flourished in moist shadows, painting the forest floor in endless green. But farther inland, plants hardened themselves against scarcity. Leaves grew waxy and small, roots reached deeper, seeds lingered longer in the soil before sprouting. In time, these differences would deepen, each isolated environment sculpting its own kinds of flora, its own way of surviving. Creatures adapted just as quickly. Small reptiles on one side of the Rift Valley hunted insects in damp undergrowth. their scales patterned with greens and browns to vanish among ferns. On the opposite shore, their kin grew leaner and paler, racing across dunes to catch beetles in the heat of day. In the wetlands, amphibians swelled in numbers, croaking in choruses so loud they echoed across lakes. But across the sea, their absence left silence, replaced instead by reptiles who had learned to rule without them. Oceans had not just divided land, they had divided destinies. The seas themselves became new worlds, where continents pulled apart, shallow waters spread, warming under the sun and teeming with life. Coral-like reefs expanded, creating labyrinths for fish and crustaceans. Marine reptiles glided through these waters, sleek hunters that flourished in the richness of new coastlines. Pterosaurs circled above, dipping into waves to snatch prey, their cries sharp against the surf. These young oceans were alive with promise, their waters nurseries for diversity that would ripple across ages. Even the sky reflected the change. Over new coasts, clouds gathered in ways they never had before, forming storms born of fresh interactions between sea and land. Rain fell where deserts had once ruled, carving new rivers, feeding new forests. Winds shifted, carrying seeds farther, scattering them across the widening seas. Some reached volcanic islands rising from the waves, sprouting into oases of green upon black stone. New horizons appeared, dotted with unfamiliar shapes, each one a sign that the world was no longer singular. At dusk, these emerging worlds glowed with possibility. One shoreline bathed in crimson light, its cliffs glistening with spray, its forests dark with shadow. Across the water, another land caught the same sun but shone differently, paler, drier, the red earth glowing like fire under the sky. Between them rolled the ocean, silver and restless, carrying whispers of the earth's transformation. And at night, stars reflected on new seas, their light mirrored in rippling water. The moon hung above, casting her glow across both lands, binding them still under one sky, though the ground below was no longer whole. From one shore, a pterosaur's cry echoed, faintly answered by another across the water, the call of creatures divided, yet still kin. The earth had begun her scattering, and life was already adapting to the truth of distance. New worlds were emerging. They were not yet continents as we know them, not yet the familiar outlines on maps, but they were different, distinct, alive, with possibilities that wholeness could not offer. In division, the earth was creating diversity. In separation, she was multiplying her stories. The age of one land was ending. The age of many was beginning. With Pangaea beginning to divide, the stage of life itself began to change. Where once there had been one vast land, climates and landscapes now varied more widely than ever before. Oceans carved barriers, mountains rose higher, forests thickened in some places while deserts widened in others. Each environment became its own crucible, shaping the creatures within it, bending them toward new forms, new futures. Evolution, quiet yet relentless, found countless paths across these emerging worlds. In the wet regions, reptiles flourished in abundance. Small, nimble forms scurried through dense forests, their scales patterned in browns and greens to vanish among shadows. Some grew longer legs and lighter frames, lifting their bodies higher from the ground, able to move swiftly through thick underbrush. Others flattened themselves against bark and stone, their culkers blending seamlessly with moss and lichen, hunters and hunted alike, refined by the need to remain unseen. Amphibians, bolstered by rain and rivers, diversified again, their voices filling the night air with a symphony of croaks and calls. Some developed stutter bodies, better suited to withstand sudden floods. Others clung more tightly to the water, their lives bound almost entirely to ponds and streams. In dry regions, life took a different path. Reptiles here grew harder, their bodies lean, their scales toughened to conserve moisture. Some became swift runners, dashing across open dunes with long, slender limbs. Others mastered burrowing, digging deep into the cool earth where the sun could not reach. Insects, too, adapted to the arid lands, their shells thickened, their cycles shortened, their swarms timed perfectly with the rare rains that painted the desert with fleeting life. Plants hardened, their seeds waiting patiently in dry soil until conditions allowed them to bloom, their survival tied to patience rather than abundance. The skis, too, saw experiments unfold. Pterosaurs, early rulers of the air, began to diversify. Some remained small, darting through forest canopies to snatch insects in quick swoops. Others grew larger, their wingspans stretching wide, their bones light but strong, capable of soaring for hours above the coastlines. They learn to ride thermal currents rising from the land, circling high in the blue before diving to hunt fish in the sea. To see them silhouetted against the sky was to witness evolution's daring, creatures that had once been bound to the ground, now ruling the air with growing mastery. The oceans, freshly born from Pangaea's breaking, became theaters of transformation as well. Ichthyosaurs grew sleek and fast, their bodies shaped like dolphins, their tails strong for propulsion, their eyes large to pierce the dim light of the depths. Plesiosaurs tested other designs, long necks sweeping gracefully through the water, jaws snapping at schools of fish, bodies gliding on paddle-like limbs. Even smaller reptiles lingered near the shores, experimenting with half-lives between land and water, their fates tied to both. Each wave carried a new trial, each current a new opportunity for form and function to change. And in the shadows, almost unnoticed, small mammal-like creatures pursued their quiet paths. No larger than a rat, they burrowed, foraged, and hunted insects in the darkness. They lived cautiously, avoiding the reptilian predators that dominated the age, yet their bodies whispered of futures yet to come. They grew warm-blooded, able to remain active at night when the reptiles slept. They bore fur, keeping them warm in cool darkness. Their jaws and teeth grew varied, capable of chewing many foods. In their smallness, in their secrecy, they carved out a niche that would one day rise into greatness. But for now, they remained shadows beneath the giants. Forests and seeds shaped their own evolutionary stories. Plants that thrived in moist air grew taller, broader, reaching toward the canopy and locking sunlight into their crowns. In dry regions, cycads and hardy shrubs clung to survival, scattering seeds built for endurance, designed to wait until rain returned. Later, flowering plants would arrive, but in this age, it was still the reign of conifers, ferns, and cycads. They painted the landscapes in deep greens and dusty grays, offering shelter, food, and oxygen to the creatures that depended on them. Their quiet persistence guided life as surely as tooth and claw. At twilight, the story of these paths was visible everywhere. Along one coast, pterosaurs wheeled against the crimson sky, their shadows flickering over waves. In a nearby forest, amphibians croaked loudly, their voices rising above the drone of insects. Across the sea, in a dry land, reptiles dug into warm dunes, leaving trails in the sand that the night wind soon erased. Each land told its own story, each shore birthed its own patterns, each valley whispered its own future. And at night, under stars mirrored in newborn seas, the paths of evolution unfolded silently. A mammal-like creature crept out from its burrow, sniffing at seeds fallen from a conifer. A reptile tested its wings in a glide from one branch to another. An ichthyosaur dove deep into black waters, its eyes shining as it chased prey into the dark. Each act was small, each life brief, but together they were shaping the destiny of Earth. In separation, the Earth had created variety, and in that variety, life found endless directions to grow. The unity of Pangaea was ending, but in its breaking, the paths of evolution multiplied, branching outward like the rivers of the continent, like the veins of a leaf, like the stars across the night sky. The breaking of Pangaea brought change, and in that change new opportunities unfolded. For millions of years, the land had been ruled by survivors, amphibians lingering in rivers, reptiles clinging to deserts and forests, and small mammal-like beings scurrying in the shadows. But now, with climates diversifying, with new coasts and seas spreading, with storms reshaping the world and forests deepening their shade, something new began to stir. A lineage was emerging that would soon dominate not just the land, but the very imagination of Earth's history. This was the threshold of the age of dinosaurs. The first dinosaurs were not giants. They were small, light, and quick, no larger than a dog or deer. Their bones were slender, their legs tucked beneath them, allowing them to run swiftly and efficiently. Their tails stretched out for balance, swaying as they darted across plains and through open forests. They hunted insects, small reptiles, and amphibians, relying on agility and sharp senses rather than size. To see one was not to witness a titan, but a creature of speed and promise, a hint of what would one day come. Imagine one such early dinosaur stepping lightly across the red soil of Pangaea. Its claws scratch faint lines into the dust. Its head turns sharply at the flicker of movement, a lizard basking too long on a stone. In a burst of speed, it closes the distance, jaws snapping, dust rising in its wake. It feeds quickly, alert to every sound, then vanishes into the scrub before a larger predator can notice. Its body is lean, its bones hollow, its muscles tuned to flight and pursuit. In its quiet existence lies the blueprint of the future. These early dinosaurs were not alone. Archosaurs, their close relatives, still prowled the land in many forms. Some stalked low to the ground, crocodile-like hunters of rivers and wetlands. Others grew larger, upright, predatory, testing the possibilities of form and power. Insects filled the skies, amphibians croaked in pools, and mammal-like creatures darted in shadows. The world was alive with competition, and in that competition, the dinosaurs began to shine. The climate itself favored them. In the dry interiors, speed and endurance were vital for survival. Dinosaurs, with their upright posture and efficient lungs, thrived in these extremes. In wetter regions, their agility gave them an edge in forests and river valleys, allowing them to chase prey or evade predators with equal skill. They were adaptable, able to live in niches that others could not fill. Slowly, quietly, they began to spread. In time, some grew larger. Their legs strengthened, their tails stiffened, their bodies swelled with muscle. Plant-eating forms appeared, browsing on ferns and cycads, their teeth grinding tough fronds into pulp. Predatory forms followed, their jaws lined with serrated teeth, their strides swift, their senses sharp. The world was beginning to change around them, and they, more than any other lineage, were prepared to meet it. The skies above mirrored this transformation. Pterosaurs grew alongside their terrestrial cousins, refining their wings, soaring higher, gliding farther. Along the coasts, Ichthyosaurs and Plesiosaurs dominated the seas, sleek rulers of the waves. The earth was filled with reptilian dynasties, each one adapted to its realm, land, sea, and sky. Yet among them all, the dinosaurs would become the most enduring, the most transformative, their reigns stretching across millions of years. At dusk, the promise of their age was written in silhouettes. Small dinosaurs raced across open plains, their shadows stretching long against the red horizon. In forests, their calls echoed softly, chirps and trills that mingled with the hum of insects. By rivers, larger reptiles watched cautiously, but already the balance of power was shifting. The sun sank low, painting Pangaea's broken edges in crimson, while the first true dinosaurs moved lightly, confidently, across the earth. At night, beneath stars mirrored in new oceans, they rested in shadows, their bodies curled beneath trees, their eyes half closed. Small, yes, but resilient, quick, and adaptable. They were the quiet heirs of a world in transition, their presence subtle but unmistakable. The age of dinosaurs had not yet fully dawned, but its light was already glowing faintly on the horizon of time. The giants had not yet risen, but their footsteps were already beginning to echo. Pangaea's story was vast, written in stone and sand, in forests and seas, in creatures large and small. For tens of millions of years, it held the earth in unity, one land, one body, one colossal stage upon which life played. Its deserts tested endurance, its coasts bloomed with abundance, its mountains thrust high into the sky, and its rivers carved silver lifelines across the red earth. It was harsh and generous, cruel and beautiful, a continent both immense and intimate. And though it is long gone, scattered into the continents we know today, its legacy endures in every corner of the world. The unity of Pangaea shaped everything. With one landmass, climates stretched to extremes, interiors baked in silence, while coasts thrived in moisture. Winds traveled farther, storms grew larger, and life was forced to adapt with resilience. Creatures learned to survive in deserts without mercy, in forests of shade and quiet, in rivers that carved valleys of abundance, in oceans that pulsed with eternal rhythm. The world of Pangaea was a crucible, a place of trial and experiment. From those trials came strength, and from that strength, futures unfolded. It was upon Pangaea that the ancestors of dinosaurs took their first steps, small and swift, their shadows lengthening toward ages of dominance. It was here that pterosaurs tested the skies, that ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs claimed the seas, that mammal-like creatures scurried into niches that would one day bloom into our own lineage. It was here that plants spread their seeds across winds, covering the red earth in green, balancing air and soil, creating sanctuaries of shade. Every breath of life we know today, every forest, every bird, every mammal, every human carries whispers of this age, For Pangaea was the stage where so much of the world's future was rehearsed. And even in its breaking, Pangaea gave gifts. The rifts that split its body became new oceans, fresh coastlines, and fertile places where life could diversify. Separation meant variety, and variety meant evolution. The scattering of the giant led to the birth of the continents we walk upon now: Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, Antarctica, Australia. Every mountain range, every coastline, every shifting current in today's oceans carries the memory of that great division. To stand on Earth today is to stand upon Pangaea's fragments. The Appalachians in North America, the Atlas Mountains of Africa, the Urals of Eurasia, all are remnants of the chains that once bound the supercontinent. Fossils scattered across distant lands tell the same story. The bones of identical creatures found continents apart, proof that they once walked the same ground. The unity of Pangaea lives still in stone, in memory, in the whispers of the earth. At sunset, when the sky glows crimson and the land is painted in shadow and light, it is easy to imagine Pangaea again, one vast land, stretching beyond sight, deserts glowing gold, forests sighing with wind, rivers winding silver, oceans crashing at her endless edges. And at night, beneath stars mirrored in seas, it is easy to hear her heartbeat, steady and immense, echoing in the quiet rhythms of Earth. Pangaea's legacy is not only in the continents she left behind, but in the lessons she carried, that unity and division are both part of the Earth's story, that wholeness is powerful, but so is scattering, that every fracture is also a creation, every ending a beginning. The age of dinosaurs would rise from her breaking. New worlds would bloom where her unity had been undone. But Pangaea herself, the great supercontinent, will forever remain one of the Earth's grandest chapters, a moment when the world was one and life learned both how to endure and how to prepare for greatness. Her story lives on in stone, in bone, in soil, in seed, and in us, the distant children of a world that was once whole. The tale of Pangaea is not merely one of stone and soil, of deserts and seas, of storms and forests. It is a story of unity and change, of endurance and transformation. For millions of years, Earth held her continents as one, gathering them into a single colossal embrace. It was a moment of wholeness, rare and fleeting in the deep history of our planet. And though that wholeness is long gone, its echoes linger still, stitched into the very fabric of the world we know. As we walked through her deserts, we felt the silence of survival, the harsh test of heat and dryness where life clung with stubborn patience. As we wandered her forests, we breathed the cool air beneath conifers and cycads, felt the soft hush of ferns brushing against the shadows, and listened to the quiet symphony of insects and amphibians. We followed her rivers as they carved silver paths through stone, lifelines threading green into the red earth. We stood upon her coasts where waves crashed endlessly, where pterosaurs wheeled above surf and marine reptiles glided below, and we watched storms swell and break with a power that shook the land itself. We saw the mountains rise like the spines of giants, pressing against the sky, their snow-crowned summits shimmering in dawn's fire. We lingered under the vast skis of the Triassic, skis that blazed by day, stormed with fury, and glowed with stars so bright they humbled the soul. We stepped quietly into the nights, hearing the whispers of nocturnal creatures, the soft calls of amphibians, the hush of wind through dark forests, and the steady pulse of waves beneath the silver moon. And then we felt the earth stir restlessly. We watched as fractures opened, as volcanoes roared, as the land pulled apart with sighs and rumbles from deep within. We stood at the edges of newborn seas, smelling salt in the air for the first time where once there had only been stone. We saw forests shift, climates diverge, creatures adapt, each environment carving its own path, each path leading toward futures unimaginable. We watched the first dinosaurs emerge, small, quick, cautious, yet carrying in their bones the promise of an age to come. We glimpsed mammal-like beings scurrying in shadows, soft-furred and bright-eyed, their tiny lives hinting at a destiny still far in the distance. We traced the seeds that drifted on the wind, the patient plants that clothed the land in green, balancing Earth's breath and shaping the air we breathe even now. Through it all, Pangaea taught us one lesson: nothing endures unchanged. Wholeness is fleeting, giants must break. But in breaking, the Earth does not diminish, she multiplies. Where there was one continent, there will be many. Where there was one climate, there will be countless. Where there was one story, there will be a library of stories, each richer and more diverse than the last. And so, though Pangaea is gone, she is not forgotten. Her mountains linger, worn yet proud. Her fossils are scattered across the continents, testaments to a time when they were one. Her memory lives in every storm that crosses oceans, in every rift valley still widening, in every coastline that curves against the tide. She was a moment of unity, and her breaking was the birth of the world we inhabit today. When you look at a map, when you see the continents divided by oceans, remember that once they were joined, one body, one world. And when you stand beneath the stars, remember that those same stars once shone upon Pangaea's deserts, forests, and coasts. The echoes of that colossus remain, whispering across time. The story of Pangaea is not the end, it is a turning point. Ahead lies the full flowering of the dinosaurs, the reign of giants, the bloom of new oceans, and the scattering of life into forms more varied than ever before. The Earth is always moving forward, always reshaping, always telling new stories. But tonight, in this moment of reflection, let us rest with the memory of Pangaea, the great continent that once held the world whole. Let us feel her deserts beneath our feet, her forests around us, her storms above us, her oceans breathing at her edges. Let us hear her silence, her whispers, her thunder, her heartbeat, and let us carry her with us, for she is part of us, her stones in our continents, her legacy in our lives, her echoes in our souls. The colossus has long since fractured, but her story will never fade. For Pangaea was not only land, she was a possibility. She was the stage upon which the future was set, and her echoes will always be heard in every wind, every wave, every star above the scattered continents of today.